If you don't learn how to work with your mind will continue to work against you. Today, we're going to look at thinking patterns that shape your perspective, your emotions, your behaviors, and your outcomes, often without you even realizing it. And more importantly, we are going to start talking about how to control them. Before we get into it, pause this video right now and go grab a pen and paper. You're going to want to take notes, reflect, and actually engage with the video and what we're doing here. This is not a passive watching experience. This is a lab. This is the Leadership Lab, presented by When the Mind Clicks. If there's someone else who would benefit from this video, bring them in as well. Go grab the whole team, go grab your family, go grab your class, bring them in, make it a group experience. But if you're by yourself, that's perfect, that's fine, just lock in with me. Let's talk about cognitive distortions. There are certain thinking patterns your brain just falls into automatically. They're not facts, they're habits. And these habits can distort the way that you see yourself, other people, your future, and experiences around you, certain situations. Your whole perception gets distorted. Cognitive, your brain, your mind, your mindset, your perspective, right? Distortion, okay? It is distorted, it is warped. It is reflective of your personal experiences, not reality. Not reality. Okay, I'm going to throw out a few questions. Just notice which ones hit for you. Have you ever been completely convinced about something and then later you realized you might have been off? Have you ever reacted to something and then later realized, okay, maybe I overread or misread that situation? Have you ever assumed what someone else was thinking without actually checking? Have you ever said something to yourself in your mind that you would never say to someone else? Have you ever been your own harshest critic, even when others didn't see you that way, and they might have even told you something quite contrary to what you're thinking? Have you ever told yourself a story about who you are and just ran with it? Have you ever thought someone was upset with you, but you didn't actually have any proof? Have you ever taken something personally and later realized it might not have even been about you? Have you ever expected someone to respond a certain way and then felt hurt when they didn't? Have you ever felt so strongly about something that it had to be true in that moment? Have you ever had a bad day and suddenly feel like everything felt like it was going wrong? Have you ever gone from one situation straight into this always happens to me, why me thinking? Have you ever predicted how something would go and already felt stressed before it even happened? Have you ever convinced yourself something was going to go wrong before it even started? Have you ever talked yourself out of something because you assumed the outcome? Have you ever made one mistake and started questioning your life and your status and positioning as a whole? Have you ever attached a label to yourself that stuck longer than it should have? Have you ever felt like one moment defined who you are? Have you ever caught yourself thinking the same type of thought over and over and over and over again? Have you ever noticed your mind tends to go in a certain direction automatically and create a certain narrative automatically? Have you ever felt like your brain was just in default mode? If you've done any of these things, I have just a few more questions for you. Have you ever stopped and questioned, is this fact or is this just my interpretation? Did that actually happen, or are my emotions making me feel like that just happened? Have you ever realized your brain might be trying to protect you, but in a way that's not actually helping? Have you ever wondered how much of what you think is shaped by your past experiences rather than the present moment? If any of those resonated with you, even a little, that's exactly what we're exploring today. These patterns have a name, and they are more common than you think. Everyone experiences them at different levels of intensity and different frequency, but everyone experiences cognitive distortions. Cognitive distortions are habitual thinking patterns. It is a habit for you to continue thinking this way. And a lot of times they are not accurate representations of what's going on. A lot of times they are exaggerated interpretations of what's going on. And a lot of times they are not helpful nor constructive. The brain prioritizes. So the brain will always put first your survival, your comfort, your safety over accuracy. So your brain is going to try to assign meaning to situations and tell you how you should respond in that moment to keep yourself safe. right? These distortions that are happening, they're just shortcuts your brain's used to, okay? But a lot of times they're harmful. The brain is a meaning-making machine, okay? Your brain wants to make meaning to everything. That person has a monotone voice and they're speaking very assertive. My brain calculating past abuse, calculating high criticism, calculating aggressive environment. That person's attacking me. That person is mean. Your brain is trying to make meaning out of everything, but not all thoughts are facts. And they're not random, right? These are learned mental shortcuts that your brain uses to interpret situations, to assign meaning, to protect you from the perceived threat. They feel true, but they are not always true. So let's continue down the path of awareness. Why do cognitive distortions exist? Where did they come from? Why did it start? Where did they develop? Well, number one, it could come from early childhood experiences, early life experiences, okay? Childhood environments, criticism, instability, high expectations, neglect. Sometimes it could come from learned beliefs about yourself, about others, about the world. So for example, if someone grew up being criticized, they may develop labeling, right? They may develop the tendency to label themselves when they don't do well that I am a failure. They may develop negative focus. They tune in on the negative and they completely ignore any positive, right? Now, what I want to say in regards to this developing in early experiences, sometimes these things can also develop from past experiences in your adulthood or your teenage years. Not every traumatic moment or cultivating event or reason that you show up a certain way happened because of your childhood. Okay? A lot of times that's the case, but sometimes you were in a toxic relationship for 6 years and that really did a number on your thinking. Sometimes that job you took, the environment you stayed in when you were in the workplace, your boss and the coworkers, all of the chaos caused you to have a certain thinking pattern and defensive mechanisms. So it's not always childhood, right? The next reason cognitive distortions start to come up is for survival and protection. Okay? Your brain is wired for survival, not accuracy. It is looking for danger, predicting outcomes, trying to guess what will happen next and equip you for that moment so that it can prevent pain. That is where catastrophizing comes in. If I expect the worst to happen all the time, then I will always be prepared. That's a safety mechanism, but unfortunately, if you continue that, you will miss out on a lot of opportunities that require a certain level of risk, like intimate relationships or big job opportunities. Another reason cognitive distortions start to develop is repetition and conditioning. The more you repeat that thought, that perspective, that idea, that narrative, the more the brain says this must be true. Your brain is just a computer. It's like, do, what is true, what's happening, what's most frequent, calculate, 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 calculate. This is how distortions become automatic. They happen fast and they start to happen subconsciously, right? You're not even consciously having that thought anymore because your brain is so used to the repetition and the conditioning of this thought. So it's like, we'll just slide that in right now. We don't even need to interrupt her, right? Another reason cognitive distortions exist are emotional experiences. Sometimes there were strong emotions that reinforced that distorted thinking, right? Last time I wasn't prepared, everything crumbled and I completely failed. That felt horrible. I felt shame. I felt guilt. I felt anger. I felt regret. So now catastrophizing has been reinforced that I have to stay vigilant and I have to stay prepared and I have to always prepare for the worst. Sometimes you have feelings like anxiety and then you start going into worst case scenario thinking. Sometimes your depression makes you put a negative filter on everything. Sometimes your shame might make you start labeling yourself and labeling others. Feelings can really start to act like evidence even when they're not. And the last thing we will go over in regards to where cognitive distortions come from, your environment and reinforcement, okay? Relationships, culture, social media, peer dynamics, your friends, your family. Sometimes these distorted thoughts are reinforced, which means the people around you, the culture around you, they double down and say, yeah, you should be thinking like that, right? Then it becomes internally stronger. Yeah, those people are that bad, right? You start generalizing, which is a cognitive distortion, right? Your culture might say, yeah, you should feel shame, right? Even the word should thinking is a cognitive distortion. And sometimes our environments, they cause us to have these cognitive distortions. So all these things make up the reasons as to why we have them. But why do they happen in the moment, even when I'm aware of where it came from? Because at the core, these distortions, they're trying to create certainty in these uncertain environments. They're trying to reduce your emotional discomfort by predicting how you should prepare. They are trying to protect you from perceived harm. And they're trying to maintain familiar patterns, even if it's not healthy. Your brain would rather be consistent than correct. And that's something we have to train, but that's a whole nother video. So as we continue talking about awareness of cognitive distortions, why are they so hard to shake? Okay, let's get aware of that. Well, one, a lot of times they're automatic. They happen so quickly before the consciousness can actually become aware of what just happened. Sometimes you've strengthened the neural pathways, right? For that cognitive distortion to live and take that route. Repeated thoughts create strong brain connections. Then the brain prefers that route. It will prefer that path because they already know how to think that way, right? And that's where neuroplasticity comes in. But yet again, that's a whole nother video, all right? Why else is it hard to shake? Well, they feel emotionally true. Even if they're logically incorrect, cognitive distortions are convincing. They are familiar. They are emotionally charged. Sometimes they're hard to shake because they become part of your identity. Okay, over time, these distortions shape your self-concept. A whole nother video. But they say, I'm not good enough. And my worldview is people will always leave me. That becomes a part of my identity. So then that's why the cognitive distortion wants to keep hanging out. Because I've made it a part of my narrative. And something to remember, stress only makes cognitive distortions worse. When the nervous system is activated, the brain defaults to fast, reactive thinking. Okay, so I'm pretty sure I'm not the first person to tell you how much stress is impacting your life, your thoughts, your behaviors, your relationships, and your actions, but take that with you. The good news is these distortions can be changed. Can we snap for that? Okay, because of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire and form new thought patterns and new pathways and weaken the old ones. Okay, think of using a new route to get home. Okay, and then you stop taking the old route. The more you use the new route to get home, the more acclimated you're going to become with that route. You're going to be like, oh yeah, there's some trees on the way here. This is actually quicker. This takes 10 minutes. The other way took 15 minutes. You're going to remember that path a lot better. It's going to feel more familiar. And honestly, if you continue taking that route long enough, you might even start to forget the old route you used to take, right? Or it might need you to freshen up on it a little bit to remember it, okay? But neuroplasticity does require a certain level of awareness, repetition, and intentional practice, okay? So just because a thought feels true does not mean it is true. And just because you've thought it for years doesn't mean it has to stay. Notice those distortions and put them on notice. I see you and you can't stay here. Cognitive distortions aren't character flaws. They are learned patterns. And anything learned can be unlearned, reshaped, and replaced. It's going to feel unfamiliar. It is going to feel uncomfortable, maybe even scary to let go some of those automatic thinking patterns. But it's possible. And almost anytime something presents a level of manageable stress or discomfort, it's an opportunity for growth. I kid you not. And that's where anti-fragility comes in. But we'll talk about that later. So how do you start to get your power back? Notice the thought, name the pattern, challenge it. Is this actually true? Or is this just familiar? Replace it with something more accurate, not just positive, but accurate, right? So if you didn't study for a test and you're like, I'm such a failure, replace it with something more neutral and accurate. I didn't prepare for that. This feels really uncomfortable that I didn't pass, right? You don't need to go from I'm a failure to I'm a winner, right? That's not a really great reframe, actually. There's a better way to actually reframe something from negative to positive. It is possible, But we are talking about taking it from negative to just true and accurate, okay? You're not lying to yourself, you're recalibrating your perception. So, as we continue awareness, let's go through some cognitive distortions. I want you to listen to each one honestly, check yourself, don't think about whether you've experienced it. Let's go through each cognitive distortion. I want you to listen to each one and honestly check in with yourself. Don't just think about whether you've experienced it, think about how often, how intensely, and whether it's been shaping your decisions and the way you show up in your life. Let's start with all or nothing thinking. So, all or nothing thinking is very black and white, okay? You are seeing the situation with no middle ground. Something is either perfect or a total failure, right? So, I'll give a couple examples. A child gets a 9 out of 10 on a spelling test and says, I got one wrong, I'm terrible at spelling, right? A manager gives a presentation that goes well overall, but he stumbles on one question and then goes home thinking that was a complete disaster. I'm terrible at public speaking, erasing everything that went right. A home cook tries a new recipe and slightly oversalts the soup. They throw the whole pot away and they declare themselves not a cook, despite having made dozens of successful meals before. That is all or nothing thinking. Next, we have overgeneralization. That's when you start making a broad, sweeping conclusion from one or a few events, assuming that one bad experience means everything will always go that way. I overgeneralize therapy. I had a terrible therapist. I don't believe in therapy. I think therapy's terrible. But I only tried one therapist. A child trips during a race and says, I always fall. I'm bad at everything that has to do with sports. Someone gets rejected after a job interview and thinks, I never get hired. No one will ever want me on their team. After one experience, maybe even two. A person tries a new hiking trail and gets lost once. Then they swear off of all future hiking, declaring, I'm just not an outdoors person, based entirely on that one afternoon. Next, we have mental filter. So that's when you focus exclusively on the negative detail while ignoring all the positives. A child's teacher writes 5 positive comments and 1 suggestion on their artwork. The child only talks about the suggestion. An employee receives a glowing annual review with 1 area of criticism or improvement noted. They spend the entire drive home fixating on that one line and can't recall a single compliment by the time they get home. Someone throws a dinner party where every guest raves about the food, except one person says the dessert was a bit sweet. The host spends the rest of the evening convinced that the entire night was a failure. Next, similar to the past cognitive distortion, is disqualifying the positive. This is when you dismiss positive experiences as flukes or accidents or just the exception, rejecting all good evidence so that the negative belief that you've created stays intact. Okay? A child wins a spelling bee but says, it was just luck. The other kids were bad, they were underprepared. A salesperson closes the biggest deal of the quarter but tells their team, it was really the client who made the decision easy. I didn't do too much. Deflecting every bit of credit that was genuinely theirs. Someone finally gets the perfect parking spot right out front of the office on a busy day, and their first thought is, this is suspicious. Something bad must be about to happen. Unable to just take the win. Next up, we have mind reading. Assuming you know what others are thinking, usually something negative, without any real evidence. A child sees a classmate frowning and immediately thinks she hates me, she's mad at me. An employee sends a proposal to their boss and doesn't get a response for 2 days, and they immediately assume she hated it, she thinks I'm incompetent, when the boss simply hadn't opened their email yet. Someone posts a photo and notices one specific friend didn't like it. They spend the afternoon convinced that that friend is upset with them, crafting an entire story about what went wrong between them with 0 evidence. Next up, we have fortune telling. Predicting that things will turn out badly and treating that prediction as a guaranteed fact. Before a math test, a child says, I know I'm going to fail, and refuses to study because it won't help anyway. So that one's a little tricky, right? If you really believe that prediction, then you're probably going to take action that will fall in alignment with your prediction. So be careful of that. An adult, before a difficult but necessary conversation with their partner, decides not to even bring up the issue because they'll just get defensive and it'll turn into a fight anyway. The conversation never happens. The issue grows. Someone buys a lottery ticket but immediately talks themselves out of even checking it. I never win anything. And then they throw it away before the numbers are even drawn. Next up is a fan favorite, catastrophizing. Okay, blowing things way out of proportion. Your reaction is disproportionate to the situation or event that just occurred. You are turning a small problem into an absolute worst case disaster. And it may not be a small problem, maybe it is a substantial problem, but either way, your response to it is disproportionate. That's how you'll know if your response is disproportionate to the event or the circumstance that just occurred, okay? A child loses their pencil and says, "This is the worst day of my life. I'll fail at everything now," right? And now that changes how they're showing up throughout the day. They're probably snappy with people the rest of the day. They're down on themselves, self-doubting. Everything has been ruined. A professional misses a deadline by one day and immediately spirals. "I'm going to get fired. I'll lose my income. I won't be able to pay my mortgage," right? Going from one missed deadline to full financial ruin in 60 seconds. Someone's phone battery dies while running errands, and their first thought is, what if there's an emergency? What if something happens and no one can reach me? Full panic mode has now taken over because of the dead battery. Next up, we have minimization, shrinking the importance of positive things or your own strengths and making them seem trivial or meaningless. You're minimizing. A leader successfully navigates their team through a crisis, and when they're praised by upper management, they respond with, "Oh, the team did all the real work. I just stayed out of the way." Consistently shrinking their own contribution. Now, I'm not talking about people who play humble, that's not, the team's the one who did all the real work. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people who genuinely feel that they don't deserve to take any contribution or accountability for the way things have went in regards to success, right? Constantly shrinking your own contribution. You'll know if that's you. There's a difference between the two. Someone completes their first 5-mile run, something they trained for months. And when their friends celebrate with them, they say, "It's just a 5K, real runners do marathons." The finish line doesn't even get a moment, right? Next up is a personal favorite, emotional reasoning. Believing something is true just because it feels true. Regardless of evidence, I feel it, so it must be real. A child feels nervous before a school play, and they automatically think, "I feel scared, so I must be terrible at acting." A parent feels overwhelmed after a hard week, and they say, "I feel like I'm failing my kids, so I must be a bad parent." The feeling becomes the verdict, without any real evidence to support it. This person is speaking to me in a stern tone, and they're giving me feedback. I'm taking it as criticism and yelling. I feel attacked. I start to feel angry, shame, annoyed, small. Conclusion, emotional reasoning, that person is mean, right? Someone goes on a first date with someone genuinely kind and thoughtful, but feels vaguely uneasy. And they conclude, "My gut is telling me not to trust them. Something must be off." The unease was actually just first date nerves, but the feeling became the story. Be safe out there. Next up is should statements. We talked about this a little earlier in the video. Using rigid rules. I should, I must, you should, you have to, I have to, that create unrealistic pressure and guilt when unmet. When these aren't met, then you start to feel guilt or put pressure on yourself or others, okay? A child thinks, "I should be perfect at reading by now," so they feel ashamed when they need help because they should have been perfect by now. A 35-year-old professional sits with the quiet weight of, "I should own a home by now. I should have my finances figured out. I should be further along." Measuring their life against some unwritten rule book nobody actually handed to them. Someone on a well-deserved vacation keeps checking their work email because I shouldn't be able to fully relax when there's stuff to do, turning rest into guilt and a vacation into a working trip. Next, we have labeling, which we also discussed a little earlier. This is attaching a global and permanent label to yourself or others based on a single or a few behaviors or mistakes. Okay? A kid spills their juice over and they say, "I'm such an idiot. I'm so clumsy." After getting frustrated during a team meeting and snapping at a colleague, a manager spends the rest of the day thinking, "I'm toxic. I'm the problem on this team." One bad moment becoming a permanent identity. Okay. And again, be mindful. There's always a thin line, right? There's always going to be a thin line with anything that I share with you guys on whether it's actually self-sabotaging behavior or something to genuinely look into. Okay. So that's just a little PSA, but we're not going to go down that route. We're going to get back on track. Someone forgets to return a phone call, and immediately they label themselves as a terrible friend. "I'm so selfish," not for a pattern of neglect that they've been doing, but for one forgotten phone call on a busy Tuesday. Then we have personalization, blaming yourself for events outside of your control or taking excessive responsibility for others' feelings and for the outcomes of situations. Okay. I raise my hand in class and I ask a question and I'm embarrassed by the question. I think it's dumb. Then someone gets up and goes to the restroom. They just left the class because of me, because of that question I asked. A team leader has a project that gets cut due to company budget changes, and they spend weeks convinced it was a reflection of their performance, never once considering the broader organizational climate that had nothing to do with them. A friend cancels plans because they're sick with the cold, and the person immediately wonders, "Did I say something wrong last time we hung out? They must be avoiding me." Making someone else's runny nose about themselves. Following up personalization, we have jumping to conclusions, making negative interpretations without supporting facts, a catch-all that includes mind reading and fortune telling. A friend doesn't wave back in the hall, so a child thinks, "She's ignoring me. She must hate me now." But really, the kid has a lot going on at home. Maybe they didn't even see their friend. Maybe they don't have their glasses on. Maybe they were in a rush. Have you ever been staring at someone or looking in someone's direction? You're actually not looking at them at all, right? You know good and well you and that friend had a phone call this morning and you guys are totally fine. So the good thing about jumping to conclusions, and honestly, any of these other distortions, if vulnerable enough and bold enough, you can actually address them. "Hey, what was that about? Hey, I saw you in the hall. You didn't wave back. Hey, when I saw you and you didn't wave back, I kind of got in my head and I thought you were mad at me. What's going on?" You're allowed to ask that, right? Instead of leaning into your conclusions and letting your mind do the game. A partner comes home quiet after a long day and the other partner immediately thinks, "They're mad at me. I must have done something wrong," when really they just had a draining commute and need 20 minutes to decompress. Someone applies for a grant, hasn't heard back in a week, and starts telling people, "I didn't get it." Before any decision has even been made, they've already written the rejection that hasn't arrived. Then we have blaming, holding other people or external circumstances entirely responsible for your own thoughts, your own feelings, and your own problems. Okay, let's talk about accountability, radical responsibility, okay? A child does poorly on a test and says it's the teacher's fault for making it too hard. Someone consistently arrives late to work and says that it's always traffic, their neighborhood, or their schedule, never considering how they might just need to adjust their morning routine. The external world is always the problem. Their choices never are. A person loses a board game with friends and they insist that the rules were not fair, the others had the advantage, or someone cheated, spending more energy finding fault than enjoying the company they're sitting with. Following up that is always being right, constantly needing to prove that your opinions and actions are correct. Being wrong feels threatening or even unacceptable. A child gets into an argument about a game rule and would rather lose the friend than admit that they were wrong. A manager continues pursuing a failing strategy for months, even as data suggests otherwise. Because admitting the approach was wrong feels like admitting a personal failure. The strategy tanks. The admission never comes. Someone argues passionately about the correct pronunciation of a word, even after being shown the dictionary definition out loud, starts finding reasons why the dictionary might be wrong. Winning the argument matters more than getting it right. And for these individuals, I want you to practice giving yourself a little grace. Being wrong is a learning opportunity. It actually doesn't threaten your status. It is an opportunity to gain more information. That's it. That's all. And lastly, we have heaven's fallacy, which kind of goes to the fairness fallacy as well. They're kind of similar, but we're not going to go over both. This is when you expect that your sacrifice, your self-denial will automatically pay off. And maybe you even feel bitter or resentful when the reward doesn't come, okay? A child helps to clean up the entire classroom and then is upset that the teacher didn't give them a special reward. An employee stays late taking on extra projects, never uses their PTO for 3 years, silently expecting that their loyalty and sacrifice will be rewarded with a promotion. The promotion never comes. The resentment quietly grows. They never once communicated the expectation. Someone does all the emotional labor in a friendship, always checking in, always showing up, always being the one to reach out, and eventually explodes on their friend for never being there. The friend never knew. The expectation was never said out loud. And for this group of people, I do want to remind you, practice doing things for intrinsic reasons, right? For you, you did it because you wanted to, because it was natural for you, right? Not for the expectation of reward. And I'll briefly go over the fairness fallacy. That's basically just assuming everything in the world will be fair. And that really messes up your perception and, your energy and your emotion as well. So anyway, we are going to wrap up with the Leadership Lab for this particular episode, awareness on cognitive distortions. Be on the lookout for our next video, which will be understanding cognitive distortions. See you there.